So many records. Awesome. So it's kind of funny with Amelia, you, and a few others. The topic I wanted to talk about tonight is sketchy conversational habits that you may want to avoid that also may have been developed through circling. So, what do I mean by this? I mean things like, and then I'll say more. I mean things like when you hear people say stuff like, "I have a story that," and they every time they like every sentence that follows, like every sentence they say about some other person, they preface with like, "I have a story that," or they'll use some sort of like circling technique, or often like a good question, like, "Oh, what's the impact of that?" But there's this flavor when you feel it when you get asked that question, you're kind of like, "Ugh, I don't know why, but I don't want to answer you," and like there's something gross going on. And so I want to address some of these because I just occasionally they'll creep in, and I think that there's always something well-meaning behind it. And this is one of the things that circling. I'm going to write this down. Sketchy. I always have to write stuff down because it anchors us and also gives us all time to breathe. Sketchy convo patterns to potentially avoid. And I say potentially because there's always an appropriate place for these things. Like we rarely deal in absolutes in circling, just because it's the human side of things. It's messy and dynamic and ever changing. So we tend to think of things more probabilistically. Like 99% of the time, it's it's better to, I don't know, own your experience in this way, but every once in a while it's like, no, you just let it out, or things like that. There's these kind of probabilities. There's best practices we found over time, and basically all these kind of habits are ways that there's some like good intention. And of course we find this in everything in circling. If you find some old survival pattern or some way of interacting with people that's no longer serving you, it always has a good intention, right? Even your defenses, you get snappy and you cut someone off, and you whatever, say something really rude. Behind that, there's almost always a kind of innocent intention, like something like that. There's this usually an intention to protect yourself, or maybe it's like an old habit of intention to protect your primary caregiver, if it's some sort of attachment dynamic or something. So one of the things we practice in circling is like recognizing and honoring the innocence of the intention without condoning the form that it gets expressed in. So if someone's being snappy, it's like, "Oh, you must be afraid." Well, also, yeah, I don't like it when you're snappy with me. That's not really the way I want to be spoken with or related with. And so in this talk, hopefully, I'll be able to highlight some of the innocent kind of intentions behind these sketchy conversational habits, while also pointing out that anytime we anytime we kind of rely on the structure of how to speak with each other, we're essentially throttling the aliveness of the conversation or the relationship. Does that make sense? So there's like a direct inverse, yeah, everyone's nodding. There's a direct inverse relationship. The more you're following a format, the less aliveness there is in the relationship. And actually, funny, I remember this was so funny. These things that just come to me. I remember Marianne Williamson talking about this in sex one time. She was like, she's like, the most exciting time like is when you don't know what's going to happen. Like, you get surprised, and it's that same sense. There's an intimacy, there's an aliveness in that, like the healthy mix of like, oh, I don't quite know what's going to happen, and yet there's that sense of safety. There's an okayness. And so we practice that as well in circling. There's this sense of okayness, but, and this is a really, these are just some basic principles, then we'll go into the specifics. So, but the way we're emphasizing the okayness in the relational realm is that when you find your own inner okayness, we can get more and more available to kind of holding ourselves, and we actually don't need others to show up any differently. And this is one of the big offerings I think circling is inviting us into. And one of the big things I see sadly getting missed on occasion when people follow these kind of formats and follow these kind of unconscious habits that are well intentioned, but ideally we in this platform and in practicing with each other, being honest, being open, being loving, being authentic, we actually learn how to do that in a way that we don't need circling, so that we can be honest, open, authentic, loving in every area of our life. And we kind of allow the circling as this dojo to give us, we show up in a certain way and we get feedback. And the idea is not that like, oh, if I show up, say in my raw anger, and the circle's like, man, that feels shitty. The idea is not that like, oh, I shouldn't be angry, but that likely the circle itself is a kind of mirror. It's reflecting something back to me, some truth that I haven't been willing to show. So in the case of if I'm angry and the circle gives me negative feedback, it's very likely that I have a care or a love or a concern for others that I wasn't including in my expression of anger. And so the feedback is not like, don't be angry, but rather like find the wholeness that was missing and bring that in too. And sometimes that wholeness is not include more, it's exclude more. It may be the wholeness that was missing was that some deep gut instinct in you told you not to say that, or some deep gut instinct in you told you you needed a boundary that you didn't set. So there's no set form of like, oh, you always are going to include more, unless including more includes including less. In which case, yeah, we can say go for it. You can always include more, but you have to have a very specific definition of what that means. Everyone tracking so far? Good. Tracking. That's one of those words that we use in circling that I guess people like you, it comes from hunting, I suppose, where you're like tracking the animal you're hunting. So it's probably a fine one to use, but I'm always really careful of like using specific cultural words. We develop an internal culture of like how, like, oh yeah, bookmarks is one of them. Like, let's bookmark that and we'll talk about it later. And most people can understand what a bookmark is, but if you use too many of these kind of cultural signifiers, you're like, people are like, what the fuck, are you part of this weird cult? And so again, we lose the emphasis or the point of like, that's not, we're not here. It's fine for us to feel the sense of community and this, we're unique and different, but our overall aim, as far as I'm concerned, is to bring more truth and more aliveness and more, and truth includes love in this sense, to how we relate to each other and the world at large. And so if we lose sight of that, we're actually losing the overall purpose or why we're doing this practice in the first place. So yeah, a quick recap of that is that I want to look at these conversational habits because I want to make sure we stay close to what I would say the purpose of circling is, to be more loving and real, where loving and real are actually one thing, to be more available and present and free in communion or in relationship. And that's always, in my opinion, caveat of the probabilities included, going to be kind of edging into the unknown, kind of leaning into uncertainty and not relying on any fixed forms, although we do have structures or foundational pointers like presence, what's happening here and now, like including your experience and taking responsibility for what's yours, like including the other person and being empathetic, being compassionate. But the way those show up, it's just gonna vary moment to moment, context to context. So let's use this example to start of, I have a story. Oh man, this thing is falling over. Can you guys read that if you want to? If you don't want to, it's okay if you can't read it, obviously. So Yeah, cool. So you guys, have you guys all heard this in a circle? Yeah, someone, yeah, totally. Someone's like, I have a story that uh, don't, that you think I'm, a doormat, or I have a story that your dad used to criticize you and that you're blah, 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 blah. So the intention, I think, behind this is that somebody's trying to own their experience. It gets overused, exactly. So there's this healthy idea of like, I'm basically trying to take responsibility for the fact that I am making this shit up. That's the like the healthy part is like, this is my own, oh gosh, this is my own stuff, I'm talking about me. I have the story, it's not real. So I think that's the healthy intention behind it. But what happens is that people, I think, accidentally lose sight of that intention and they use it for the exact opposite, right? It's nuts. You're like, wait, what? Just now that I've said I have a story, I can say whatever the fuck I want with impunity, right? And it's like, no, that's not how it works. Not only because is that not how it works in circling, because circling is about presence and honesty, and we're not going to just like, oh well, you use the special password and so now I can't actually tell you how it impacts me, but also because that's not how it works in life. Like if you go up to somebody at the register and you're like, yeah, I have a story that your hair is pink because you want attention, and you feel like you're just a worker drone, and it doesn't matter how right you are, they're going to be like, fuck off. Like, I don't know you. Like, stop. And of course, usually what's happening is that there's a deeper need. As if I'm saying I have a story, that there's a deeper need that I'm not owning or taking responsibility for, that this habit of using this language profile is keeping me from stepping into. So for example, in this weird example of calling somebody out for having pink hair at the store, which again, maybe I'm completely wrong. And there's a kind of arrogance of like, I'm going to use this so now I can just say it, instead of being like, genuinely, I have no idea whether I'm right or not. But basically what's in that instance, what's going to be driving me is something like, I want to have a deeper relationship with you. I want more aliveness in my life. And so I'm going to use this, psychoanalytic awareness I have to try to get a deeper connection and make you vulnerable instead of me, so I can feel what I want to feel. And you can imagine that just never goes that well. And ironically, if you're able to just speak that, it almost always goes well. Right? If I was like, if I caught myself mid sentence and I was like, man, well, I don't know if that would work well in the grocery store, actually. But you could imagine a way that like I could imagine showing up to the cashier, noticing myself wanting to do that, and just and then being like, how's your day? And me being like, I find myself really wanting more connection than I'm getting. That the cashier would probably respond with a lot of gentleness and empathy and sweetness, because I'm actually genuinely owning it. I'm feeling it. I'm allowing it to be seen. I'm not needing anything from them. I'm not expecting them to empathize with me. I'm not expecting them to see me. It's another weird habit that people get into is circling. It's like, you should see me. That's supposedly that's what this is about. I need to be seen. And it's like, no. Or yes, life is always seeing you. Consciousness itself, or God, or however you want to see it, is always alive and awake, witnessing your experience with you, always there, always loving, always accepting. And so you need nothing from someone else. And anytime you expect that from someone else, you're not only are you kind of disempowering yourself, you're losing sight of that connection with that thing that's greater than you, that holds you and supports you no matter what. And of course, you don't have to accept this if you don't believe in God, or you're like, yeah, that I don't know about that. That's never my intention. in these kind of talks. I always assume that you guys can make your own meaning. You can translate to the belief structures that make the most sense to you. And more importantly, I always trust that you can run experiments. So if you're like, I don't know about that, Jordan, that you test it in and inside and outside of circles. And so you may be able to run this experiment. You may feel like this sense of deeply wanting to be seen, and you're blaming others for not seeing you. You've shown up, you've done your best to be vulnerable, you've explained what's happening, and then you can kind of test it out. You can look and see, like, okay, what's going on here. And in that moment, you're kind of separating just briefly, even in a second, as you ask, like, what's going on here? You separate from the experience, right? And you're witnessing it. And you're witnessing it as something that isn't it, right? You can all imagine this right now. You're all having an experience. You don't have to imagine it. You can do it. You're having an experience listening to me. And then I'm saying, well, what's aware of this experience? What's aware of experiencing? And you're like, and you're looking at it. And so the awareness is kind of looking at itself. And for me, there's a kind of spacious, empty openness that includes this nervousness in my belly. That includes Xenia smiling and nodding, Mom smiling. It includes the car driving by. So there's this kind of open, empty, full awareness that allows everything in my experience to just be as it is. And so in circling, a lot of what we're doing is actually aligning with the kind of phenomenological truth of this allowance that's already here. So we often think of it as if, oh, I'm going to practice being more present. But that kind of comes from this, like, oh, Jordan's going to be more present. Like, my individual I is going to step into presence. And a lot of times the movement that you'll recognize this because you've probably fallen into presence more often than you've actively, busted your way into presence. You find yourself present. You kind of discover yourself here, not thinking about other stuff, but in a flow. You kind of stumble across an intimacy with a really good friend in a conversation, or in a circle, you're like, wow, that thing that I look for is happening. And so this really, we're kind of getting out of the way, or we're letting go. It always, whenever people say that, oh, well, you're getting out of your own way, it's a bit confusing, right? Because who's doing the getting out of? And it sounds pretty wishy-washy, but the actual experience, I think, is one of like recognizing this awareness that's here always, as soon as you look at it. And again, this something you can test. Don't take my word for it that this awareness is always here. You just ask, like, how do I know that this is happening? What's doing the awareing of Shane taking a sip of his drink? Of, the feeling of Max's neck and head and the hair? What's doing that awareing? And it's, as soon as you ask that question, it's there. And you can look back and ask, like, I don't know, maybe it disappears for you. I'd be curious about that. So yeah, you can kind of check that. And then you're like, oh yeah, what's this awareness like? And you find out, probably, if you're like most people, that it does just have this big yes to experience. If you're resisting, awareness has a big yes to your resistance. It's not like you shouldn't resist. If you're feeling really happy, it's like, cool, you're feeling happy. If you're feeling guilty for feeling happy, cool, no problem. We're here. So we're kind of learning to align or shift our sense of who we are to this greater spaciousness. It's this kind of conversational container that, or experiential container that allows us to be with an incredible range of what it means to be human. Because it's in its fullest realization, that container already is saying yes to absolutely everything. Which, paradoxically includes that, says yes to fighting that. So it's not saying, oh, well, we're just saying yes to, I don't know, children being torn apart from their families at the border. No, it's also saying yes to that not being okay. So I have a story. Thanks for going with me on that. I love going on those runs. It always feels so good, and I appreciate you all coming along with me. I have a story at its best, and when it can be useful, is a way of signaling that we're making up something about somebody else. We're projecting. And in any moment, it might be useful, but it's just good to remember that there's infinite ways to signal that. And not all of them are verbal. Some of them are nonverbal, like um, doing that. Are you hurting right now? You know, I'm saying I have a story that you're hurting right now. It's actually more embodied. I did it with tone as well, but I could be like, "Are you okay?" Right? And you can tell in my face that I'm like not sure what's happening. There's also energetic expressions. Like one of the things that we found over time with circling, in the early days, people were really excited by like these new conversational forms. I can say hearing that and I can say noticing blah blah blah, and it just turns out those can be really helpful up to a point, and then it turns out their utility just stops because the energy carries so much more, the tone, the expression, and just the general vibe. I don't know if it's pheromones, if there's subtle energies. I'm not making any kind of ontological claims about that. But what we are making is this empirical claim that when the energy is aligned with the expression, um, it's the best. When the energy, when it's not aligned, people are going to hear the energy more than the expression. So yeah, basically my recommendation is use this sparingly and recognize that you may be using it to protect yourself from a deeper vulnerability, and that you don't need to protect yourself from that deeper vulnerability, probably because you have this great, spacious, open, empty, loving yes to exactly who and what you are. And when you feel that, you might recognize that you can um, either share what's really going on for you, or it's okay to just be guarded. And then instead of saying, I have a story, you might say, man, I find myself really guarded and I don't know where to go from here. Or I'm not willing to open up to you. It's just a statement of fact. That's what we're looking for ideally, is we're just stating the facts. And we're throwing out a bunch of stated facts into almost like jazz, right? Xenia's playing the bass and Max is playing the horn and Shane's playing the piano and I'm playing the drums and mom the guitar, and we're all just throwing the notes out that the notes are facts, and then we're moving and dancing and influencing each other, and the whole circle or the whole conversation or the whole group dynamic, if you're in a meeting or whatever, your condo association, it doesn't matter, on a group text thread or an email, this is just this song that's being played, and you can change the song to a certain extent by changing how you show up, and you have certain limitations on how you change the song. You have to somewhat stay in the groove, in the pocket, or else eventually people are going to kick you out because it's going to sound too shitty. It's going to be too painful, right? And you can get more and more skillful at finding your own unique, weird expressions so that you are free to play your jazz no matter what style you're in. That was a fun metaphor. Again, thanks for coming along with me. That's great. Um, let's do another one. Do you guys have one? And I have a story, one that you notice. I got more. I just wanted to check to see if y'all have some.
Do you mean other lines that are commonly you? And you already, yeah. Did you already talk about when people ask, how does that impact you? Right.
Boom. That's my next one.
Sometimes that's really misplaced and it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can tell sometimes when people are doing it because they don't want the spotlight on them anymore. Like they just kind of want to pass the, get the attention on to somebody else.
Right.
That's what I think I see sometimes.
Right. So that's a great one. I love it. Okay, so we got, oh yeah, Victor Wooten plays the other players sound good. I love that. Yeah, Victor Wooten's amazing. Um, amazing bassist.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Um, it takes me back to the band. Some of you guys may not know, I was in a traveling funk rock band for 4 years, just like playing from dive bar to dive bar. And just, it takes me back to that epoch of my life. So, yeah, exactly what you said, Senior. This, yeah, how does that impact you? Sometimes, or yeah, I've seen people use it as a way to deflect attention.
It seems disingenuous sometimes.
Yeah, it
I
seems,
think. Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of times, like, it's, yeah, it can be used to deflect attention. It can also be used. Okay, so wait, first let's honor the gift, right? Um, there is some reason why people are doing this that makes a lot of sense. And maybe you guys are generating your own theory. I'll give you 10 seconds to generate your own theory of like, what's the right use of this?
One case where it makes a lot of sense is like if you suddenly remember, like if you're like expressing a lot and you suddenly remember, oh wait, there's another person there. Like, what's that like for you to like be in the presence of this expression?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There's a genuine desire to include the other person in the relationship. Oh shit, I've been really self-oriented. What's happening for you? What's this like to hear? How's that impact you?
Totally.
Yeah. What else? There might be a couple other kind of right uses or healthy uses of this.
And well, for the feedback for yourself. So you might really be coming from the place of what you just said, but it might also be like an uh-oh, like I need you to maybe be my mirror for me right now. Like
Yeah.
I'm a little insecure and I'm not sure how that impacts you. I'm actually more worried about me.
Right. Right. You may there's the kind of insecurity that you need reassurance and
Yeah.
you're kind of dishonest about it, but there's a healthy, honest one too, where you're like, God, I don't really know what's going on here. And I need to rely on some people outside of me
Yeah.
to kind of get stabilized here. Like, is this okay? Is this normal? How's this impact you?
So, yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you may, it's the kind of information seeking where you may be like, um, I don't know, maybe you're making a big decision, like there's a job offering in another city and you're gonna have to move your whole family. And so you're like, hey, I'm really like this is a really good job opportunity and I really want to do it. What do you think about like what do you think? How's this impact you? How's this impact us? Right? It's an extreme example, but you can imagine there's like a in the moment small version of that, a micro version of that where um, you genuinely just want to get some feedback. Yeah. Right. Like I've probably done it tonight a couple times. How's this landing? How's this impacting you guys? To kind of touch into the other sides of this multidimensional being we call this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like we can get over focused on the first person perspective. I. And a lot of relational practices will accidentally foster a kind of narcissism because it's all about I. And one of the things that circling is trying to do is kind of balance that with saying there's also a thou and there's also a we.
Mm.
And there's also a larger it and a context that it's in. All of those perspectives and points of view are very alive, important, and here, they're present. they're all stepping into the mystery together. And they all offer us guidance, and they all can offer us kind of traps. So the only way we can get information about the thou is through asking questions of the other person, right? What's going on over there? What's it like? How is this for you? How do you experience us? How do you experience me? What do you mean when you say scared? What do you mean by that? Well, what's it like to feel this? How is it to relate to yourself in this case? You know, all these kinds of questions are ways of gathering relational data, is one way to put it. And also kind of signaling, as Max said, like the other person matters. They're here, they're real. And so there's a sense of like just honoring, like there's other human beings here, and it can be very open-ended. There's a really healthy version of this. It's just like like in this genuineness, this earnestness of like, I don't want to ask a yes or no. I don't want to direct it. I'm just like completely like, what's your experience like? This reminds me of another habit. I know this is a bit of a detour, but it was actually many years ago now, but I started working with this group of computer scientists, and they would get so mad when I asked, like, what are you feeling now? And I was like so confounded. They were like, you keep trying to direct my experience. And they would be like criticizing me. And I'm like, huh? How am I directing your experience? I'm just asking what's going on. And then it was like, it like dawned on me. I was like, oh, I'm totally directing their experience, because I'm asking how are they feeling? And there's a lot more in their experience, and feeling isn't so great for these computer scientists. It's not accessible, so it brings up these feelings of shame and lack of self-worth and feeling inadequate, and they don't value it as much. So like, you know, it'd be different if I said, what are you thinking? Or what are you sensing? What are you, it doesn't matter. What I started doing is saying, what are you noticing and what are you experiencing? Because those are much more neutral. They include thoughts, they include awareness, they include relational stuff. They include, a lot of times, like this group would have an incredibly sharp eye on social dynamics, on group stuff. So if I say, what are you feeling? You're like, fuck you. I've just spent the past 20 minutes figuring out this kind of status game that these two people are playing and why they're doing it. And like, you're asking me what I'm feeling. Ask me about what actually matters to me. All the stuff I'm noticing. And if I started instead saying, what are you noticing? What are you experiencing? What are you aware of? What are you focused on? These kinds of questions. I would get this incredibly rich experience of what it's like to be them, and how the circle would suddenly gain more collective self-awareness, because we'd be getting all these patterns, and they'd be noticing, oh, well, there's this dynamic where all the women want to impress the leader. And I was like, holy shit, they're so right. And I did not see that, and if I'd asked how you feeling, they'd be like, I'm feeling angry, and I would have totally missed the reason they're angry is this like great insight that the whole group can benefit from. So I'll write that one down. That's a kind of side note here. But instead of, how you feeling, we're going to come back to this. Or another one that people sometimes make the mistake of using is like, what's it like in your body?
I was just gonna say
right? Which also has its place. There are times and places where that can be the best or most appropriate or most exciting or most alive question. But more often than not, what's it like in your body? More often than not, what's happening is me as the person asking this question, making this mistake. I'm feeling uncomfortable because I can't connect myself to the other person. Or I'm feeling uncomfortable because I want to circle and go deep, and they're just telling stories. And so I'm like, well, if I get them to speak about their body, I'm going to feel better, because I'm going to suddenly feel them instead of having to chase their mind. And I'm not aware of this, right? I'm very innocently asking because I'm uncomfortable and I'm trying to solve it. But of course, it's going to be, it's generally doesn't go very well. Whereas instead sharing hey, I'm feeling agitated and I don't know how to connect with you. It's going to be way more powerful. Or whatever it is, you could be, you could just notice, like, God, I noticed that like you do use your mind so much. You could ask them what that's like. You could say, you could honor them for it. You're fucking brilliant, aren't you? You could ask them like, do you relate with your body at all? Are you feeling anything? There's an openness. What's it like in your body is different from like, God, I'm just fucking curious. Like, or I want to know for my sake of exploring, like genuinely what your experience is like in this moment, not because I need to feel your body, because I want to know how you relate to yourself. Like, is it all mental activity? Is it like spacious awareness? Are you in a spiritual state? Are you suffering? Are you dissociated? There's a way that you can ask it that's very innocent, very curious, very open-minded. There's no need for them to behave or respond in any particular way. And again, what we find is like, you can ask this question for the rest of your life and you're going to be fine. No one's going to throw you out of circling. No one's going to like stop being your family member. You'll probably still get promotions at work. Like, this is not the end of the world. You haven't sinned if you commit one of these errors. It's more like, all of these things, if you notice the habit, can bring you into a deeper self-awareness that allows you to be more honest about what's really going on here and now. It allows you to be more compassionate, more empathetic. And that's going to bring you a richer experience of life. It's going to bring you more aliveness, more connection, more insight, more awareness. And that's, of course, I think what we're aiming at here. Maybe not, of course, but certainly what I'm aiming at with you guys. So, how's that impact you? Yeah, it's similar to what's it like in your body. It's like a lot of times what's happening is this is me, and this is the other person. And I say something, and then I suddenly feel super vulnerable or scared or uncertain. And I'm like, oh, what'll make me feel better is if this person reassures me. And so instead of saying, I'm scared and I want reassurance, I'm like, how's that impact you? And the other person reacts to the energy of like, because the words are words, but the energy is like, reassure me, please. And that's a much louder transmission. It's a much stronger impact. And so this person is like, and they put up their shield because they don't want to be hit by this weird wave of blue marker. And then, and then this person's like, well, I said the right circling words. All I wanted to know was the impact. And then this is the great trick of the mind. I'm vulnerable, and I want this reassurance, and I don't want to feel this vulnerability. And so I say these words, and then I'm like, oh, and I get the shield back, and I'm like, oh, fuck them, like, and I blame them now because they're not a good enough circler to share impact, and so suddenly I'm like completely absolved of my discomfort of needing reassurance because I now have like put them in the box of bad circler. And that's just it. That's just the kind of the fear and guilt attack cycle. And then, of course, the other person usually, because they're getting this weird mixed message, often is like reacts kind of guilty and afraid. And then it kind of like, it kind of corroborates the story that this person has, me in this case, of like, well, they're not a good circler. and then this like feedback loop happens where like, I'm now judging them and they can feel that. So instead of reassure me, now they're getting hit by the you suck. And I'm better than you. vibe, and then they still have their shield, and so they're like, ah, and then this person's like, well, yeah, since you can't say ah, you're a bad circler and you suck and I'm better than you. And it's just like this endless loop of terrible, terrible communication. Oh my God, we've all done this, right? We've all been both of these people. And we've all been the person that's on the outside that's like, well, like, oh God, I just dropped the green marker. That's okay, we'll use brown. We've all been this person that's like, man, thank God I'm not those people. which is somehow like doing both of these things, right? Like I'm better than you because I'm vulnerable, I'm scared about how I'm at, and I'm defensive.
So good.
And the way out is the same. Like if I'm this person, like right now, the way out is like when we feel that, oh look, I've got a green on brown. But the way out is instead feeling this kind of the kind of same, oh yeah, like I'm doing the same thing as them. And there's this one way to call it be forgiveness, you know, where I forgive both of us for this like obvious human habit that like we all are taking part of. And in that moment of forgiveness, like it's genuinely and actually okay. Like I suddenly step outside of that cycle. I'm no longer perpetuating it. So in kind of seeing myself in the other or seeing the other in me and kind of holding that the world as a mirror or mentality or perspective, I suddenly I can go either way. If I have compassion for them or if I have compassion for me, it doesn't matter because it's one relationship, right? There's one line segment that we intersect in our I-ness. What do I mean by that? I mean, the way that I hold what's really going on is that there's this relationship that goes to infinity in both directions, and my I-ness intersects in this moment right here, and the other person's I-ness intersects in this moment here. And so you can forgive or love or interact from the I or the you or the we. And if you find that deep-hearted, compassionate embrace, then you're doing the work on both, ends up going in both sides, in both ways. That's another empirical claim that you can test, right? You can find that out. If you can find, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's caveats to this, and you'll find, oh yeah, I have to actually make the effort to love someone else. Or I have to actually make the effort to love me. And that's fine. You're welcome to and invited to practice both on Circle Anywhere. Circling in general and in your relationships in general. Okay, we're getting a slight echo from somebody in a minute. Mute them. College football. There we go. You can unvideo mute at any time. It's just the audio there. Okay, we've got like 15 minutes left. What are you guys noticing? I can pull out more, but let me do a quick check-in.
I'm just loving this. I think I'm just really enjoying this.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
loving it.
Timothy.
I mean, I've only done circling for like a week, so this is just sort of like, I feel like I'm just sort of getting the backstory of like the thing that grades people over once they've done it for months and years. And so it's good to hear every community has their own, you know, stories and stuff. So it's just kind of fun to hear and get to know.
Yeah, there's a couple others on the call that have only done, 3 hours of circling, and I'm hoping that this will not only, it's kind of, fun to hear, like you said, and I think it can do a lot of things to hear this in advance. One is like maybe you'll notice these before you get in a bad habit. Two is you'll notice that, yeah, we're a community like any other community with things that annoy us and habits and unconscious biases and all those things. And we're uniquely, in some ways, uniquely committed to bringing those to awareness and to working with them. But we still are full of our own habits. And so you can kind of feel maybe a greater welcomeness of the mess of being human, both in yourself and as you contribute to the community and as we develop and grow. That, man, my one of my best friends in Austin has been with me since the beginning, as we've been running circles here for 7 or 8 years, at least once a week. And he started noticing that like we'd develop some new exciting habit, and then we'd bring it into our circling, and then like 6 months later we'd be like, oh shit, we kind of overdid that, and we'd like do a little counterbalance. This is lost. And then 6 months later we'd see like the community doing that exact thing, and we're like, damn it. So like for a while we got like really into like being radically honest, like I'm gonna say absolutely everything. And then we're like, like I wasn't including my care or my communion or the relationship in this. And we kind of backed off. And then 6 months later, the community is just being fucking radically honest with each other all the time. And we're like, shit, this is not good. And it was fine. It was like, yeah, we some people got hurt, I'm sure. And maybe some people don't circle but anymore, but that's okay. That happens. I hope that won't happen again. I hope we've matured past it. And there's cycles. This is a crazy growing ecosystem. It's not like a machine that we just nudge it, and it's way out of any one person's control.
I don't have like a super crisp way to say this, but kind of the whole time, or for a while listening to you, Jordan, I've been thinking about all the things that we like don't know how to say, or that like I don't know how to say in circles, where it's like there's a pretty clear felt sense of something, but like the words are just not there, or like if the words do come, they're like not the right words.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just kind of thinking about that.
What do you make of that?
I've gone through different phases. I mean, for a while, I think I was like, what the hell? Like I try to bring certain things and it just always goes sideways. And it was super painful. Like I tried on like different hypotheses, like, oh, I shouldn't be this way. And then after a while I was like, okay, probably that's not right. And my current thing is like, my current thing is like, there's just stuff that I don't know how to say. Like it hasn't revealed itself in that way yet. Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the really interesting things that we're doing is we're actually giving language to things that don't have words yet in our culture. And like for example, in there's that old, I don't know how old, but there's this old like adage of like the Eskimos have, or the Inuit have like 100 words for snow because it's super freaking important to them. So it's similar in Sanskrit. There's like a bunch of different words for the kinds of awareness, like the awareness that stays, and the objects self-seeing as awareness radiating in non-dual isness or whatever. They have all these like terms that like the people in the trade are like, yeah, like that. Oh yeah, that's that awareness, and that's that awareness. So I think we're reinventing some of those words in English and for our modern times, but we're also doing something with a collective awareness that we may have done in the past, but I haven't heard much about. And there's certain ways of like relating. There's this kind of like we were playing with at the studio the other day, and it didn't go as well as I'd hoped, but kind of like gerunding everything. So like instead of saying I am this or I feel that, where like everything is a process, you know, like I I aming or I'm sadding or something like that, you know, and some of these like you find just yourself naturally wanting to play with grammar when you the deeper and deeper you get into circling, you're like, oh yeah. Or I find myself, I'm like, how do I refer to collective awarenesses? And so sometimes I'll find myself saying awareness. I don't know, maybe awarenesses will catch on. Maybe we don't need that word. Maybe awareness will catch on. But yeah, we're exploring these territories. Like, yeah, collective awarenesses. Why do we not have a word for that in the English language? I don't know. Maybe because awarenesses works. Or maybe because it's something that we haven't pointed to very much as a society. And so we haven't really settled on this kind of signifier, this nomenclature. And what's so interesting, you know, words can really separate us from experience. And you've all felt that in a circle where you're feeling something and then you name it and it just deflates. And that can be a really good thing, right? Like when you're super pissed and you don't want to be and you're like, I'm angry. And then you're like, huh, I'm less angry now. So that's really cool. Words can also bring us in a way, and of course has its cost as well, but words can also bring us into deeper intimacy with things. Mm-hmm. So right now, if I'm talking about our awareness as a group here, you guys, or our awareness is now collectively self-reflecting on our awareness in a way that we weren't before. And the language allows us to direct attention in a way that we couldn't without that object, that kind of fake separation. Mm-hmm. And I say fake because I think you guys have all had this experience of if you really look at any division, it doesn't matter. You could look at some of it's really obvious, like the Pacific Ocean. Well, where's the Pacific Ocean end and the Atlantic Ocean begin? You know, or you look at ocean itself. Well, does that include the beach? No, but well, is there such a thing as a beach without an ocean? You know, all of our like if you look at something so small as this marker, like, you know, is it really a marker? Or is it a collection of plastic and ink? And what's the difference? Or is it atoms? Is it electrons? Is it quarks? Is it strings? Like, is it even anything without my making meaning of it? So is it at all and ever separable from the like self, the subjective epistemological enactment of experience? And these questions are super fun to contemplate, but where I end up on a pragmatic side is that yes and always yes and no, always any division, any sort of like naming we ever give to any sort of object ever in experience or in reality or in time, including experience and objects and reality and time themselves, are these arbitrary but incredibly meaningful separations of infinity. And our experience, I think, is one of these infinite infinities. So you could pick any one experience. Like right now, I'm feeling my breath or I'm feeling calm. And you can delve infinitely into what calmness is like. And eventually you're going to find places where we don't have words for what you're experiencing yet. So one of the things that we're doing together is kind of figuring out like what are those in both the kind of personal phenomenology, what's happening in myself, but also the interpersonal, what's happening in our we or between us. We're just discovering that we need language to help us get intimate with experience that we don't have before, but we don't know yet which language, because some of it we don't need. And I think that's what you're experiencing, Max. You're kind of like edging into, well, yeah, like this seems really important. And then you kind of get this feedback of like, oh, that one isn't that important. And so you then have this moment to decide like, maybe that's the feedback that like this, like languaging this isn't as important right now as getting intimate with the experience. Or no, I just haven't found the right language yet.
Yeah.
Or the language is right, but I'm too disembodied in my reflecting. So I had to step out of my experience in order to name it. And the feedback I'm getting is actually inviting me to step back into my experience. And that's one of the great offerings I think we can do through this practice, is to be able to be fully embodied and invested in the relationship and the experience while being fully in this empty, open-hearted witnessing awareness. I can name it while I'm fully in it. And that's a sweet spot you guys all know of relationship, of this intimacy. And one way we do this, just to bring it home, is by naming what it's like for us to be together, which is surprisingly uncommon in our culture, right? To just say, you know, Timothy, when you nod like that, I feel my heart, and your smile kind of warms me up. You know, just naming directly what our relationship is like right now, even though we don't know each other, I feel this kind of weird kinship I'm a little embarrassed by. Yeah, that's a good way to bring that capacity in. And you can of course bring that in to anything. It doesn't have to be in circling. You practice it here, but you have the whole world open to you. You're muted, Tim.
Sorry, if we're brave enough, we have the world open, all available to us.
Well, it's available to you whether you're brave enough or not.
Sure, but I mean, to have that experience requires practice, bravery, other things, I think.
Yeah, there's a real courage, as a lot of you guys can attest, that it doesn't always go well. And I can speak this way with you, Timothy, because I've made so many mistakes over the years, both in and outside of circling, and made so many failures. And hopefully that's one of the benefits of these talks and training programs and everything like that, is that we basically have this collective wisdom from, which I think wisdom comes from, Danielle, what's the quote? Wisdom comes from experience, which comes from, or good judgment comes from experience, which comes from bad judgment.
Oh shoot, like how do you get good judgment, experience? How do you, or no, the good decisions or something like that? Yeah, it's like, how do you learn to make good decisions, experience? How do you get experience bad decisions?
That's right. Yeah.
Close. Yeah.
Yeah. Close enough. Yeah. So yeah, that's exactly right. It does take a courage, because you're risking something. You're risking going against the grain. You're risking showing parts of yourself that haven't been loved, haven't been accepted. You're risking maybe not being liked or being criticized, or maybe judging your own self, enacting your self-critic, and going into these shame spirals, or going into depression. Maybe you're even risking the incredible challenge of ecstasy, of feeling good, of feeling love, of feeling received and seen and heard, which can really call into question these deep-seated assumptions about who and what we are. A lot of times I think that's the bigger risk, is not facing the discomfort of these negative feelings and showing these parts of ourselves that we don't like, but rather facing that we're loved and accepted and okay anyway. Facing our own kind of radiance, our own brilliance, really requires us to step beyond ourselves, our previously held ways of who and what we are. And perhaps that's, you know, to sum it all up, I hope that you notice any habits you've developed in circling. They're probably ways that you're not only kind of unconsciously acting, but you're probably emulating someone or something else. And my invitation is to step into your own brilliance, your own radiance, your own deep self-trust, and find your own natural expression of the thing you want to say, and take that risk and start a conversational pattern that I'm going to have to give a talk about in a year, not to use. Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Wonderful talk. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jordan.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Jordan.
Tons of love. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question, Jordan?
Yeah.
Are you doing any more circles online, facilitating yourself, or are you just doing the live in Austin ones? I don't see ever that you're running any circles. Am I missing something?
I'm doing Tuesdays at noon Central Time.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah. Okay. And
Yeah.
that's in the regular schedule?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good to know. I miss circling with you. So.
Yeah. Likewise.
Yeah, same, man. It's good seeing you.
Fun
Yeah.
talk too.
Thank
Night, everybody. See you.
Lots of love.
Mm.